Hi, I'm Allie. Join me as I show you how to do this southwestern pendant featuring a Hubble Stitch bezel that you're going to do the same exact thing just with smaller beads for a 25 or an 18 millimeter cab. Remember, if you need any materials to make this design, go ahead and look below the video in the description and we'll list out exactly the materials to make this design. Go ahead and gather everything up on your bead on it board with some dragon thread and a needle and we'll get ready to get started. So to begin, we are going to be using a 25 millimeter and an 18 millimeter cab, stacking one on top of the other. The cool thing with this design is we are going to create our bezel using Hubble Stitch. The small one, we're going to use 11 O's. The big one, we're going to use 8 O's. And they're done the exact same way. Just that different size of seed bead works perfectly for those different bezels that we're creating. We're going to begin with our lower cabochon, because it's a little bit bigger, so it's easier to see that Hubble stitch. And I want you to initially get out 2 colors of your 8O seed beads. Go ahead and put your smaller cab, that 18, off to the side. And I'm going to be using a size 11 Bead Tech beading needle along with some white color, that crystal size 8 dragon thread. I have about 5 feet of thread on, that way I can continue with each project. And we're going to go in and we're going to get ready to do our Hubble stitch, which is going to start along the back and then we're going to build toward the front. So the first thing to do is to put a stop bead at the end of your thread, and then we're going to do 12 units of Hubble stitch. We're going to begin by using 1, 2, and 3 of our black beads and letting them drop down next to that stop bead. Go ahead and take your needle now and go back through bead number 1, away from the stop bead toward bead number 2, and out right after bead number 1. To create our first Hubble stitch unit, we'll use 1 bead now of the alternate color and sew down through bead number 2. So remember, our thread was coming up bead number 1. We're adding a bead and we're going down through bead number 2. Our unit now looks like a little foosball player with his pads there to the right and the left, the bottom and the top. Add your next unit. 3 beads go on. Let that drop down, this time rather than the stop bead, next to the last unit. Sew back through bead number 1 toward bead number 2. Have your thread and needle exit bead number 1. Add bead number 4, which is going to be our alternate color. And then I have you coming down through bead number 2. When you come down through bead number 2 then, that's going to create your second Hubble unit there. I want you to go ahead and produce a total of 12 Hubble units all together. I have 2 here, 10 more to go. Once you have the 12 Hubble stitch units created, you'll notice that they tend to go top, bottom, and they kind of swish all around. That's why we purposefully made our tops, or the heads of our little foosball players here, the gold. So we know how to turn it so that we make sure that we're connecting the correct sides and that we're building off the gold side. What we need to do right now is build this into a rounded section. So we're currently coming out of our last Hubble unit, and we're going to connect that last Hubble unit to our first Hubble unit. The way to do that is to go right next to that stop bead, and we're going to sew up through bead number 1 in the first Hubble unit. So my thread's coming out of bead number 2 from the last Hubble unit, and we're sewing up bead number 1 from that first Hubble unit. Remember, if you ever struggle with learning any of these stitches, when we get into more complicated designs like these bezels, we have introductory videos as well to learn. From here, we're going to go through bead number 2, so I'm skipping over the gold bead in that first Hubble unit, going from bead number 1 to bead number 2, and then I'm going to come out and exit through bead number 3, which is going to be one of those bottom black beads. We're going to go the whole way around then, connecting all the bottom sections here of our Hubble unit. So you can see I'm kind of turning the gold towards the outside, making sure the base or the bottom of that unit, the black goes towards the interior. What we're going to do is sew through the bottom of all of those Hubble units. So see all of those single black beads at the bottom, exiting through that bottom bead of unit number 1. We're going to go back to unit number 12. Pick up a gold bead and sew through that black bottom bead of unit number 12. Sewing through, then add another bead, sew through the bottom bead of unit number 11. Continuing on, then you're just going to sew through that bottom bead of all of those interior black beads. So this is a way to make sure that your gold portion of your beads, that head there of the right angle or of the Hubble stitch, sits to the exterior. You're adding a seed bead and you sew through the next bottom bead. You're going to add 12 beads connecting all of the bottom here of this Hubble stitch. See, I'm adding a bead, connecting the black. If the next bead down is the gold bead, you know to flip it. It's sitting upside down. Adding your gold bead and connect this whole center line. What that's doing is creating your bottom section that is going to be where your cabochon sits inside. So that's going to basically be the netting that holds it in place. So I know it's a little bit hard to see here with those color mixes. It keeps wanting to fly off here, but you can see that it's laying correctly and nicely as you're going in and adding in that additional 8OC bead. When you get to creating the smaller cabochon, that 18 millimeter cabochon, it's the same exact thing, but instead of using 8OC beads, we are using 11O. So it's kind of nice. It's the same exact technique, just smaller size bead, creating again 12 rows or 12 units of our stitch, and then connecting them all together. Once you get back to the beginning here, I want you to go past that first black bead and sew in through 5 beads or so before bringing your needle out to establish that center row. Now you can see that all your Hubble stitch units have all the gold beads facing towards the exterior. Your cabochon is going to sit right in the middle of that. So when you put it face down, you should see just a little bit of each bead on the outside. And whether or not you're doing it with 11Os or 8OC beads, it's all starting out the same. The next thing we're going to do is add a second row of our Hubble stitch onto the exterior. To get up to that, I'm coming out of one of my black beads here, that bead number 3 from one of the Hubble stitch rows. I'm going to go up through my bead number 1 from this Hubble stitch unit, and I'm going to have my thread and needle exit through one of my exterior gold beads. This gets us ready now to do our next layer of our Hubble stitch. As we're creating with 8OC beads, our next Hubble stitch row is going to be all 8OC beads again. We're going to do Hubble stitch, but we're going to add an extra bead in between. After coming out a gold bead, I want you to add 1 extra bead. This is going to be an extra gold bead. After that, go ahead and add 2 of your black beads. Go over to the next peak or the next unit, the gold bead. Sew back towards the previous unit, the one your thread is coming out of. And the black beads are going to be beads number 1 and 2 of this Hubble unit. The gold bead I just shared and sewed through, that was the top of the first row, is going to become the bottom of the second row. So then I sew back through bead number 1. And when I'm coming out the top here, add another black bead, number 4, and down through number 2. Don't worry, I'm going to go through that again. From here, we are going to add a gold bead just as a spacer to kind of connect them. Then we're going to add 2 black beads. Pick up your next little peak there of your Hubble stitch going through the gold. Going back through now that first black bead toward the second black bead, which are beads 1 and 2 of this new unit of Hubble stitch. Right there coming up. And then as you do so, we're going to add 1 more bead, which is going to be another one of our black beads, and sew down through bead number 2. All right, ready for our next one to show for our second layer of our Hubble stitch. So here we have again, we're adding, see that gold one just kind of hangs out there where the thread's showing. Add a gold bead, which just hangs out there. You can even let it drop down if you want. On my piece here, whoops. So that gold bead just kind of hangs out. Don't even think about that as part of the Hubble unit. Grab 2 more beads. Bead number 3 is the gold that sits below the Hubble unit. Go back up through bead number 1 toward bead number 2, just like we did when it was the first row of Hubble Stitch. Add 1 more black bead, and sew down through bead number 2. Once again, gold bead goes on just for good measure. 2 black beads through the gold bead toward the last unit that you've created. Sometimes when you do it fast, it's a little bit easier to see. Back up through your first black bead toward the second black bead. That creates them kind of sitting on the side there and open, ready for 1 more bead to get added, and then down through bead number 2. Go ahead and add that the whole way around the exterior, creating a second 12 units of Hubble Stitch that are spaced out by 180 gold bead. As you finish up your ending here of your second row of your Hubble Stitch, you're going back and connecting to that first gold bead that your thread was coming out of, going back up through the black bead here, adding in your last bead, bead number 4 for that stitch. And then from here, you're going to connect them by going up through the gold bead that you added, up through bead number 1 of that first unit, and then out through your top bead or bead number 4 of that black unit. You can see that these are already ready now to start turning in to create your bezel. Coming out of here, we're getting ready to do our third row, kind of our fourth row of our bezeling. And this row, we are going to be using some of our smaller beads to connect. So for this design here, the bigger one, we're going to be using an 11-0 and our 8-0 bead. When you go into using your smaller cab here, you're downgrading beads. So you're using a 15-0 and an 11-0 in the middle. So whatever we do on this larger one, again, we're doing with a smaller size. So as I grab the 11s for this 25mm cab, you'll switch to your 15s on your 18mm cab. Coming out the top of all of the second Hubble units, it's that top black bead that we're going to be connecting onto. You can see what we're going to do is add an 11, an 8, and an 11, and sew through the next top bead. 11, 8, 11, through that next top bead. Once again, because we use 12 units as our start, we're going to do this 12 times. As we go around this loop here, you can see that this is going to actually start to pull the cab, or pull the bezel rather, into a rounded shape, which is going to allow us to, on the next stitch, put our cabochon in there and really pull tight around. As you're adding your last 3 beads, you'll want to go back into the first couple beads, and you can see I've put my cabochon in place here because I'm going to get ready to start pulling this towards the center to get that cab to stay. From here, I want you to exit through one of the 8-0 beads that you just added in this last line. So remember, we added the 11, 8, 11. You're going to exit through one of the 8-0 beads and add 3 of your 11-0s. Skip to the next grouping of 3 beads and go through the next 8-0. Because I've used 2 of the same color, the 8-0s, it's going to look like you're kind of hopping over top of the one. You're going to add 3 11-0s, and you're going into that next 8-0 in that group of 3 beads that you just added, the one that's between the 2 11-0s. And see how that's starting to pull that in already and really encapsulate our cabochon. 3 beads go on, go through the next black peak. Once again, as we've done with this whole project, you're going to do this a total of, you guessed it, 12 times. As you're pulling and doing your cabochon and your bezel, I would pull in towards the project, and that tightens up your thread. So it kind of looks like every other black bead is really what you're grabbing onto, because the one that sits below is actually from your last Hubble unit. 3 beads go on, and then grab on to the next black bead that sits as part of that group of 3. Going around then, we're going to finish up this circle here, and I'm going to reinforce that thread line to hold in my cab. Adding in my final 3 seed beads here, I'm sewing back through that 8-0 seed bead that I originally started out, the first 3 seed beads, and coming out the second 8-0. Now on my sample piece, I went a little bit more dramatic then and picked up some of the middle of that 3 beads, so the silver, and added in an 11 and an 8-0 seed bead in between each to bring it a little bit closer and make it a little bit more dramatic. So that's up to you if you want to do that, or know that you can stop at this point here. To make it a little bit more dramatic, you're going to bring your thread and needle out through that middle silver bead. So we added 3. You want to exit through that middle silver bead. We're going to connect on to all of the middle silver beads here, and you can do so by adding in 1 8-0. You can do a 15 on each side, depending on kind of what you want that look to be and how you want that point to sit. So you can see you can do 1 single bead, you can put 15s on each side of it, completely up to you, but you're going to add 1 bead and then progress on through your next center 11-0 bead just to add a little bit onto the design. I'm going to go ahead and keep doing so to add that gold towards the interior of the design, adding in 1 more 8-0 seed bead. Just like the previous row, as you finish, you want to come back through the first bead that you added. It kind of locks it into place. Give a nice tight pull towards that center, and then take your thread around that interior 1 more time. So back through that middle 11-0 seed bead, as well as the 8-0 that you just added to create that nice center of the pendant. From here, we are going to get ready to create the top section of our pendant. And then we're going to add in some pearls as we connect the 2, 1 on each end. It's so fun to see how the different colors make these different pendants appear. So again, we're going to reinforce, and then I'm going to take a new piece of thread and needle and do the exact same thing to create my smaller cabochon. Once you finish working through your 25 millimeter, we're working on the 18 millimeter now. And I just wanted to show that it's the exact same, except we're shrinking the beads. So instead of using 8-0 seed beads, I've done the first row of the Hubble stitch, connected, and done the second row of the Hubble stitch with 11-0s rather than 8-0 seed beads. Exact same count, 12 units. Just like we came out of the second Hubble stitch unit and did an 11-8-11, we're downgrading again, and our pattern connecting that outer edge of the second Hubble stitch row is going to be 15, 11, 15 into the next one. So every step is just using a size smaller bead. 15, 11, 15 into the next top of the next unit. Go around and do this 12 times, just like you did, showing that it's the exact same pattern for the smaller cab as it is the bigger cab, just stepping down a bead size. Once you finish your 25 millimeter and your 18, and remember, anytime that you were using an 8 in the first one, you use an 11. Anytime you were using 11 in the bigger one, you switch to a 15. Pattern's the exact same, just downsizing beads. From here, we want to decorate the outside with pearls. So if you want to decorate the outside with pearls, you can decorate it with something, nothing. You can do these as independent components. You can add them together like I'm going to be doing. Completely up to you. I'm going to be decorating the outer edge with my 3 millimeter pearls. And I want to decorate the outer edge a little bit differently than I did my sample piece. So my sample piece, I did basically every other row, and I'll show you how I did it. This one, I'm going to change it up and do a little bit more of that bold pearl outer edge. So you're going to be using your 3 millimeter pearls, and we're going to use the outer edge to connect one of our cabochons to another while decorating the outer edge. Coming out of one of your Hubble stitch units, I want you to get back to your second row of Hubble stitch. So we have our first row right there. You can see it kind of looks like a little tulip with our black body and the gold head. We're going in, and I want you to come out through that second Hubble stitch unit on the exterior here, coming out of bead number 1. We're going to sew then and skip over bead number 2 of that Hubble stitch unit. skip over bead number 1 of the next Hubble stitch unit and sew down through bead number 2. So you look like you're skipping over an entire Hubble stitch unit. On your thread and needle, when doing so, I want you to put 11, 15, purl, 15, 11. Sewing down that second Hubble stitch bead, then we'll bring those pearls right to the outer edge and decorate up. From here, sew through the next gold bead and out through the first bead of the next Hubble unit. Coming out the next Hubble unit, you're going to do 11, 15, purl, 15, and 11. I'm choosing to use all of my silver color seed beads to add to the outer edge of this gold cab. Coming out of Hubble stitch bead number 1 from this unit, you're going to go into bead number 2 and sew down the second Hubble stitch in, skipping over. You're going to do the same exact thing as well with your smaller cab, going through the next gold bead, which is the connector, up through bead number 1 of this Hubble stitch unit that I'm on there, adding in again 11, 15, purl, 15, 11, skipping over bead number 2 from that same Hubble stitch unit you're on, skipping over the gold bead, skipping over bead number 1 of the next Hubble unit, and sewing down bead number 2 of the second Hubble unit over. That has 3 now on the stitch there. You can see how the pearls are really decorating that up. You're going to go in and continue going through the next gold bead up into bead number 1 of this Hubble stitch unit, adding your seed beads and your pearls and continuing on adding 3 more of these pearl stations. So finishing up adding those 6 outer edge pearls, I did the same exact thing to my smaller cab as well. You can see again, you can do it independently. You can stack them on top of one another, but we use the exact same process, exact same exiting of the beads using a 11, 15 purl. So the pattern's the exact same for adding those pearls. Now, if you only choose to add the 6 pearls and do the connection, this Southwestern style one is how it's going to end up. What I'm going to do is actually put more pearls around my gold base just to give it a little bit more. And the way that we're going to add our next layer of our pearls is I want to come out one of the exterior 8/0 seed beads there. See how there's 3 seed beads that sit basically in front of each pearl section? You're going to come out the last one, and then you're going to go into the first one of the next series of 3. In between there, you're going to add an 11, a purl, and 11, and sew through. So after doing so then, picking up my thread and needle, I'm just going to sew through those beads in between, going up towards the front, sewing through the 11s and the 8s, making sure then that I go over and that I'm coming out once again through that last 8 that sits right in front of that pearl combination. Add an 11, my purl, and an 11, and go over to the next grouping of pearls and sew through that first black bead. You can see my needle and thread wants to go right away through the next 2 beads. Go for it. This is going to add another layer of pearls around the outer edge and just give it a little bit more of a pearl base. Once again then, going to the outer edge here, going around, adding in my 11, and I'm choosing to do this in my silver color, then my 3mm pearl and my silver 11, going into the first one here and letting my needle kind of take it around. I'm going to do this the whole way around, but I'm going to stop and leave an open space. That open space is going to be the way that I'm going to connect my bigger to my smaller cabochon. Now it's time to connect the 25mm to the 18mm cab, and then we'll do our bail. I'm going to do my bail in gold to mimic the gold cab along the bottom, and then I'll do the bail along the southwestern one as well. So I have my independent units here. The top one has the pearls on, 6 of them. I think 6 is plenty. Anything more will really start to be too full. If you want to, this has a nice snowflake look. You could even exaggerate it with more seed beads along the outer edge. Coming out that last 8/0 seed bead, above that unit of 5 beads here, we're going to connect to this pearl and share it. I'm going to add 111 like I've been doing, 11, 3, 11. I'm going to add the 11, sew through one of the pearls from the smaller cabochon, and then I'm going to add another 11 and sew through that next 8mm bead that I'm supposed to sew through. So instead of adding a 12th pearl onto the bottom piece, I'm adding that connector and utilizing the pearl that's already part of the other piece. I want to reinforce this, so I'm going to go back through the pendant here, back to where I have beads that line up next to one another, coming out of that first 8-0 seed bead that I added beads to. I'm going to exit my thread and needle there. Shift your thread and needle back up through the last set of pearls and 11, 15 pearl. Come down then into that pearl and 11s, that's the connector, and then go right over to your grouping of pearls that sit after it. This is going to connect those pieces and make that connection nice and secure. From here, I'm going to take this bottom thread, weave it through, and I'm going to tie it off to the thread that's already there in the back. The top thread then that we have on is what I'm going to use to do the bail on that upper cabochon. So the last thing up to do is to create our bail. You can see that I've sewed back through, tied off on my sample piece, and that thread at the top that we've kept is going to be our bail. And we're just doing a nice square stitch bail here at the top that sits perfectly behind that pearl. So on our project here, we are going to be using 8 seed beads to create the bail. Where I want to go in, and I'm going to use gold seed beads to mirror the gold that's at the bottom here. And you can see my predominant color in my sample piece is the one that I used on the bail as well. So coming over here, I want to make sure that I'm coming out through one of the gold beads along the back. You're coming out through the head of your first original piece or your original section of your Hubble stitch. And you want to make sure that you're coming out the 11 seed bead that sits basically directly behind that top pearl, because you want to be at the top of your piece. From here, you're going to add 1 and 2 of your 11 seed beads. Go through the next gold 11, which will make these, 8 seed beads, which will make it sit right on top of the pearl when you flip it over to the front. From here, I'm going to go back up through that first 8 seed bead. You'll see a tiny bit of thread on the outside. Don't worry about it. 2 more 8s go on, and then you go down through. I'm going to turn to the back so you can see it a little bit easier. Go down through bead number 2 of that first grouping of 2 8-0s. Back up now through the 2 beads that sit on the left-hand side. Grab 2 more 8s, down through the bead on the right-hand side, just that first 8-0 that we just put on. Up through then and over through the 2 on the left. And you're going to repeat this since we did 12 as our initial beads for our Hubble stitch. We're going to do this 12 times. 2 more beads go on. You go down through the bead on the right, and then up through the bead on the left that your thread was originally coming out of, as well as the first bead that you just added. So here I have 4. I'm going to go 5, coming down, going over, and up those last 2 beads. So I've got 5 on right now, and I have 7 more to go to get to a total of 12 stacks of 2. So finishing up the bail is a breeze. We have our 12 units in, and you can see I've already sewed down through the bead on the right-hand side here in order to finish it up. And what I'm going to do is sew back up through the left side, just as if I'm getting ready to add my next grouping of 2 beads. But instead, we are going to bend this bail back to the original 2. So I'm coming out the bead on the left-hand side. I'm going to go up through the bead on the left-hand side from the first group of 2 that we've added. Curl that toward the back. And then you're going to come down through bead number 2 of the first 2 beads that you added and go up through the last bead that you added on row 12. That is your connection. I'm going to reinforce that connection going back down through bead number 1 from row 12, tightening that up, going back in now like I'm doing the ladder stitch into bead number 1, and 2 just because it's out there, the first 2 beads on the left side, going over here to the opposite side, going down the 2 on the right, and then I'm going to bring my thread and needle toward the back of the project, so back through kind of wherever, because you're not going to see the thread there, making sure it stays to the front there so it's nice and center with that pearl in the middle. Sew your thread and needle toward the back starter thread. This is exactly what we did on the base one, also on the 25mm cab. And just kind of wiggle it through there. Sewing down till I get to that stop bead. Once I get to the stop bead, sew the thread ends together and finish up the piece. So you remove the stop bead, tie them together, 2 knots, and then burn down that thread edge wherever it is along the back of the project. Super fun way to use the exact same counts of 8 O's or 11 O's in your starting section and just switching from 11s to 15s as we go from smaller to bigger. You can do this as one single pendant. You can do it as just the big, just the small, pair of earrings as the small pendant, or go all out and even add more crystals and more beads along the outer edge. I can't wait to see what your pendants look like in our Facebook group for beading and jewelry making. So make sure to post some pictures of your designs there as well. Thanks so much for joining me in this fun Southwestern cabochon pendant. It's really fun to see how you can change it up, doing a smaller cab, bigger cab, adding them together, keeping them long, making it into an earring if you want to, and really changing up the design without changing out the counts. You're just changing the bead size. So fun. Can't wait to see your designs as well. Make sure if you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss anything from us here at Potomac Beads. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and stay tuned for more inspirational designs.